The icy wind whistled across the endless plains as the lonely cowboy pushed open his creaking barn door, his boots crunching against the frozen dirt. He squinted into the pale moonlight, unaware that last night's quiet act of kindness had already set something far greater in motion. Just hours ago, he had found a starving native child, trembling in the dark, eyes sunken with hunger and fear. Without a second thought, he had lifted the frail little one into his arms, shared his last piece of bread, and wrapped him in a warm blanket inside the barn. Now, as dawn crept over the horizon, a strange unease stirred in his chest. The air felt heavier, the world quieter, as if holding its breath. He didn't know that beyond the mist, hidden in the shadows of the rising sun, hundreds of warriors were gathering, and his life was about to change forever. The cowboy lived alone on a wide, silent prairie where the wind was his only companion and the howl of distant coyotes his only music. His small wooden barn stood against the cold night like a lonely guard, its walls weathered by storms and years of isolation. Every morning he rose with the sun, fed his horses, fixed broken fences, and carried water from the well, his life a quiet routine far from any human voice. The nearest town was a day's ride away, and letters or visitors almost never came. Nights were the hardest. He would sit by a dim lantern, staring at the empty horizon, wondering if this was all life had left for him. The cold air bit through his coat, and yet he endured, his heart heavy but patient. He had no family, no friend, and no reason to expect that one single night would change his lonely life forever. The night stretched long and cold, and the lonely cowboy tightened his coat as he stepped out to check the horses one last time. Before turning in, the moon was thin and pale, casting silver streaks across the frozen prairie, and the barn creaked softly in the wind. Just as he reached for the gate, a faint sound cut through the night. A weak, trembling cry carried on the wind. He froze, his heart beating faster, and turned his head toward the shadowy line of trees at the edge of his land. For a moment, he wondered if the wind was playing tricks on him, but then it came again, softer yet desperate, a sound no man could mistake for the wind. His boots sank into the hard earth as he followed the sound, each step echoing in the silence, his breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. When he reached the forest edge, his lantern light fell upon a small figure huddled against a tree. The sight stopped him in his tracks. A Native American child, no older than 7 or 8, sat trembling, his skin pale with exhaustion, lips quivering, and eyes dull with hunger and fear. His tiny hands clutched his chest as if holding on to the last bit of warmth. The cowboy felt a heavy ache in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known in years. As he knelt down slowly and whispered softly, "Hey, little fella, you're all right now. You're safe." The child didn't answer, too weak to form words, his head tilting forward as if the weight of life itself was too much. Without hesitation, the cowboy scooped the frail boy into his arms. Feeling the sharp bones beneath the torn clothes, he carried him back to the barn, the cold wind biting harder with every step, but his heart burned with determination. Inside the barn, he wrapped the child in a worn but warm blanket, the same one he used on the coldest nights, and gently pressed a cup of water to his lips. The boy sipped slowly, his trembling easing slightly, and the cowboy broke a piece of bread, offering it carefully. He watched as the child chewed weakly, every bite a small battle against hunger and fatigue. For a long moment, the cowboy simply sat there in the hay, the lantern casting a soft golden glow around them. Feeling the weight of the boy's struggle and the stillness of the night, he thought of his own childhood, of nights when he had known hunger and loneliness, and something inside him shifted. He whispered to himself that no child should ever face this kind of cold or fear alone. As the child's breathing steadied and sleep finally claimed him, the cowboy leaned against the wooden wall of the barn, listening to the wind outside and the soft, fragile breaths beside him, never imagining that this simple act of kindness, in the quiet heart of a lonely night, was about to draw the attention of an entire tribe by morning. The barn was quiet except for the faint crackle of the lantern and the soft breaths of the sleeping child, yet the cowboy's mind refused to rest. He leaned against the rough wooden wall, staring at the boy wrapped in his blanket, and a heavy thought pressed on his chest. He knew this was no ordinary child. The beads and patterns on the torn clothes spoke of a proud tribe, and he also knew the history of these plains. One misstep, one misunderstanding, could bring more trouble than he could handle. What if the tribe came looking for him and thought he had harmed the boy? The wind outside picked up, rattling the barn doors and whizzing through the cracks, and every sound felt sharper, more threatening. Somewhere in the distance, an owl screeched, followed by the low rustle of branches swaying in the dark. The cowboy's hand instinctively moved to his rifle leaning by the hay. But his heart wasn't thinking about defense, it was thinking about the boy. As he watched the child's small chest rise and fall, he remembered nights from his own boyhood, nights when he had slept cold and hungry under an open sky after his parents died, the stars his only witnesses. He remembered the ache of fear, the loneliness that crept in like the cold, and how just one hand of kindness could have changed his world back then. That memory tightened something in his chest, and he whispered softly to himself, "No harm will come to you here, little one." But as the night stretched on, the prairie around him seemed alive with shadows. A soft thud outside made his heart jump. He blew out the lantern and held his breath. The barn swallowed by darkness, and he listened. There it was again, a faint crunch of snow or dirt, then silence. The horses stirred, their uneasy whinnies sending a shiver down his spine. He peered through a gap in the barn wall, but saw only the silver moonlight over the empty land. Hours passed, filled with the kind of quiet that makes a man feel watched, and sleep never came to him. The cowboy's thoughts twisted between fear and determination. He knew that if someone came for the boy, he would stand his ground, not because he was fearless, but because his heart couldn't turn cold after what he had seen in the child's eyes. The wind outside seemed to carry whispers through the trees, and with every creak of the barn, every distant rustle, he felt the weight of an unseen presence surrounding his lonely ranch. He tightened the blanket around the boy once more and stayed awake in the dark, unaware that the night itself was holding its breath, and that before the first light of dawn, the silence of the plains would break in a way that would change his life forever. The first pale light of dawn crept through the cracks of the barn, painting faint golden lines across the wooden floor as the cowboy sat stiff against the wall, his body aching from a sleepless night. The wind had died down, leaving an unnatural stillness that pressed against his ears, and even the horses seemed tense, shifting their hooves nervously in the straw. Slowly, he stood, careful not to wake the boy still curled beneath the blanket, and reached for the barn door. His hand hesitated on the iron handle as a strange weight settled in his chest, an instinct whispering that the world outside was no longer the same. He pushed the door open, and it groaned loudly, the sound slicing through the silence. A gust of cold air hit his face, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke and earth. And as his eyes adjusted to the light, his breath caught in his throat. Across the open land, lined in perfect silence, stood a wall of men, at least 200, Native American warriors, their faces painted, their spears and bows glinting in the weak sunrise. They were mounted on powerful horses, unmoving as if carved from the earth itself. Their dark eyes locked on the small wooden barn. The cowboy froze, his heart pounding so loudly he could hear it in his ears, and a wave of fear rolled through him so strong it made his hands tremble. Dust swirled around the hooves of the waiting horses, lifted by the light morning breeze, and the only sound was the faint creak of the barn door as it swung wider behind him. His mind raced. Had they come to take the boy back, or to punish him for bringing the child onto his land? He swallowed hard, his mouth dry as sand, knowing that one wrong move could spark something deadly. The sun climbed slowly, casting long shadows of the silent warriors across the plain, and he felt smaller than he ever had in his life. Memories of the night before flashed in his mind, the boy's trembling hands, the soft breaths in the dark, the quiet promise he made to protect him. Now, that promise felt heavier than any weight he had ever carried. He thought about reaching for his rifle, but his instincts told him that any sign of aggression would be his last. For a few endless seconds, the world seemed frozen, the cowboy in the doorway, the warriors unmoving, the prairie holding its breath under the rising sun. His heart thudded in his chest as he realized that the act of kindness that warmed his So last night might now cost him everything, and yet, even with fear clawing at him, he felt no regret for helping that child, unaware that the next moment would decide whether this silent standoff ended in blood or in something he could never have imagined. The cowboy's chest tightened as one warrior broke from the silent line and rode forward, the rising sun glinting off the beads in his hair and the steel of his spear. The cowboy braced for the worst, his hands trembling at his sides, but the warrior stopped a few feet away and dismounted slowly. He lifted his hand in peace, his voice deep yet steady as he said, "You saved the chief's only grandson." For a heartbeat, the words hung in the cold morning air, and the cowboy felt his fear wash away, replaced by a warmth that reached deep into his lonely heart. One by one, the warriors raised their hands in silent respect, the sound of hooves soft against the frozen ground as they turned and rode into the horizon. The cowboy watched them disappear, his soul forever changed, knowing one small act of kindness can echo louder than the sound of fear across the wild plains.